Talking Legacy with Magic Hall of Famer Reid Duke.
Next on Eternal Durdles. Hello and welcome to Eternal Durdles. I'm your host, Zach Clark, and with me as always, Phil Blackman. Phil, how's it going, man?
Zach, it's not about me. Nobody cares about me. Nobody wants. You don't even want to talk to me. Who we want to talk to is Magic Hall of Famer, Pro Tour champion Reid Duke on the cast. Reid, welcome to the channel.
Reid, welcome.
Hey, Phil. Hey, Zach. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man. A long time coming. It's a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, for sure. You know, it doesn't require too much arm twisting to get me to come chat Legacy for a little while.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I mean, we've been following your career for quite some time, so it's really great to just have you here in the flesh to hang out with us. We're just gonna pop right into it. Let's talk about Legacy. Let's actually just go further back from that. Let's talk about Magic. What drew you to Magic initially?
Well, I played Magic like my whole life, ever since I was a little kid. So back then, anything with knights and dragons and giants and cool stuff like that would have been an easy sell for me. But the real trick is, you know, how has Magic kept my attention over all these years? And it's just such a deep and immersive game, both in terms of the strategy of the game and just everything surrounding it. You know, the art, the collecting, the lore. So yeah, I mean, Magic's just a really special game in the sense that you can spend a lifetime on it and never run out of things to do.
Yeah, it's one of those games where I find myself often just not like playing, and then I realize it's like 7 a.m, and I'm like, oh
yeah.
God! Not only has the sun come up, I actually have to start doing things for the day. You know.
And in that regard, you're like, I haven't even finished my brew yet.
Yeah.
One thing that I do adore about this game is you actually see the difference between how much success somebody can have in it. I mean, you've reached the pinnacle of the game in many ways, and yet still, when you come and you jam some Legacy at the locals at Game Storia here in New York, you still got the Forest playmat with the green sleeves and the green deck box, and you're going to jam some elves, and it's sweet. And it's just like you just get to see like the grounding of a celebrity in the game and the love for it, and it's like I love the meeting of those two things. It's really lovely.
Yeah, and I think it's not just a coincidence. I mean, my biggest asset in terms of a professional career is I just love Magic so much. You know, so it's easy to get up and put in the long hours and do your best when you're just having a ton of fun.
And speaking of ton of fun, I want to get right to the good stuff. What you've had success in every facet of Magic. You've had limited success. You're obviously a Pro Tour champion and pioneer. You're a Magic Hall of Famer. But I know that you've said on many other podcasts before that Legacy is your favorite format. Is that still true? And what is it about Legacy that draws you to it?
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair to say. You know, it's certain that Legacy is my favorite constructed format. I'm a big limited fan as well, but yeah, I think we can say Legacy is my favorite format, and that's not too big of a stretch. And what draws me to it? Well, I like how. I guess my one sentence answer would be I think the gameplay of Legacy is the most engaging. So, you know, deck building and problem solving is fun in every format, but when it actually comes down to all right, you got to navigate a turn where you have a brainstorm and your opponent can have all these free spells and you're under pressure from Wasteland and you know that the game could end next turn if you mess up. Like the number of decisions and importantly the number of meaningful decisions you face in a game of Legacy, I think is higher than other formats.
Given the number of decisions, I know a lot of times or a unique part of Legacy compared to other formats is obviously that the cantrip suite, Ponder and Brainstorm are in pretty much every blue shell in Legacy, and those involve a lot of detailed decisions and planning ahead. And you have experience both casting Brainstorm Ponder decks. I mean, you won what was it? I have it here, Grand Prix Louisville in 2017 with a Deathrite Shaman build that was a Ponder Brainstorm, very cool deck. But you also have results with Legacy Elves, obviously Legacy Jund, which we'll get into. Do you find the difference of navigating those games with a blue cantrip style shell versus a more mid-range shell like Jund or a combo deck like Elves varies heavily, or is it you have enough reps that you recognize how to navigate those turns pretty much the same across every kind of archetype?
Good question. I think certainly every deck is different, and having access to the card selection of blue does feel a lot different. But that's not to say that these non-blue decks don't have really challenging um, patterns as well. The thing with Brainstorm is just the raw number of ways that you can play a turn and resolve a brainstorm is so large. Whereas other decks like elves or some ancient tomb deck or whatever it might be, it's like you face a lot of really challenging decisions, and the way you make those decisions has a huge impact on the game. But there are just not quite as many choices.
Hmm.
So that's, I think, what's special about Brainstorm and all of the similar cards.
I think I remember early on when I was starting to get into the format, I read an article of yours where you specifically talked about feeling like a powerful wizard and talking about brainstorm and all the possible ways to use brainstorm, and that was something that like really intrigued me because I hadn't played with the card since Mercadian Masks, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Brainstorm is really, really fun, and that's certainly one of the draws of the Legacy format is like you get to play with this really, really sweet card and have that great gameplay experience.
Yeah, I was curious to know if since I've seen you play uh, from combo to mid range to control, going all the way back. I mean, one of my favorite videos to watch of somebody executing a game plan is there's a video back in the old SEG open eras where you were playing Top Miracles and you were playing against a Stoneblade player, and they had just maneuvered to a position where they had a stronger board presence. They had more cards in hand. You were down to top and lands and two cards in hand that we discovered was force plus blue card, and you just navigated yourself to a position to have an overhauling entreat the angels for lethal through a counterspell. And it was just like it was one of my favorite games to watch, being like, this is somebody who's navigated a plan from like X turns out and like understanding like what matters. And then I've also seen you just like cast a billion spells in a turn off elves. So it's like your range is wide. And as somebody who pretty much, I'm pretty much a Tundra player through and through. And I was curious as to like if you have preferences as you bounce around between all these different archetypes and have strengths with all of them.
Phil bases his personality off of this video, actually.
Yeah,
It's who I am. It's who I am deep down.
that's good to know. The first thing I'll say is like it's all about variety for me, especially as a longtime player. Like I love to get into all the different archetypes and experiences you can have in Legacy. Another thing about me is I'm kind of like a contrarian. Like if everyone is out there believing that brainstorms and delvers and fetch lands, that's the best thing you can do, I want to be like, no, I'm going to prove them wrong. I'm going to do something completely different. So that's like not necessarily a purely good quality, but it is something that makes me show up to tournaments with elves and Jund and weird stuff. I have had at various points in my career kind of like a revelation, or like my friends have given me a talking to where it's like, dude, you got to just play brainstorm. Like you're really making this way harder than it has to be when you choose a non-blue deck, when obviously the weapons that blue has available are so strong. And that has been true at certain points. Like, elves is a great deck, and then there have been times when it's correct or even like a great idea to play elves. But in general, I think if you just play a brainstorm deck every time for your whole Legacy career, that really can't be a bad idea, because the card is so good, the color is so good, the flexibility is there, the customizability is there. So I do think that I would miss brainstorm the most if I was to sort of take that out of my repertoire.
Is there a particular kind of brainstorm deck in the current format that you would gravitate towards if there was a major event this weekend?
It's a great question. So I think back on like my history with Legacy, and when I was playing the most and when I considered myself like, kind of at the near the top of the Legacy game, I love to play control decks. I love to play Miracles specifically, or, like a reactive mid-range deck. And that was awesome. But today, when I only get to play like a little bit more infrequently and I'm not super sharp on the metagame and what's going on with all the different matchups. Heck, I don't even know like what all the popularly played cards do in Legacy these days because there's so much, mixed in. I'm sure we'll get to that later on. But anyway, what I'm getting at is that now that I'm not like a finely tuned, perfect high volume Legacy player, I would probably like to choose something a little more proactive, like a Delver deck. And yeah, when I one of the events that I play at the highest stakes these days is like I'll join a Magic Online Championship Series event in Legacy, and I usually perform the best when I play Delver, like Is It Delver, Teamer Delver, Grixis Delver.
Do you have any? And I want to hop into what you think about the format as you have played it recently. I know I've seen you a couple times at Game Storia, but are you planning on going to Eternal Weekend in December? Is that anywhere on your radar?
Yeah, I really want to go. I went to Eternal Weekend last year. It was in Philadelphia last year, and I was playing, and I was like, "This is just the best. This event is so cool. Like, I can't believe I don't mark it off on my calendar every single year. Like, I've probably been maybe 3 times in the last 10 years or something. But I kind of swore to myself last year. I was like, no matter what, I'm gonna have to go in 2023 and like bring my best and maybe try to find a way to have like a fully powered vintage deck and stuff like that. But
Nice.
but yeah, I am really 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 hoping I can make it to Pittsburgh in December.
Oh yeah, I look forward to losing to you in the finals. Is there? Do you have? Is there a one or two decks that are currently like I'm likely going to play this in Legacy? I'm likely going to play this in Vintage that you're thinking of as you like prep for it. If you're doing any prep at all.
Legacy is tough. Legacy is pretty wide open. I would be willing to play like almost anything if I thought it was really good. Vintage, I usually go for a combo deck, like a Dark Ritual deck. In particular, I just can never beat the Bizarre Baghdad decks with anything besides Dark Rituals. So, Doomsday I like to play, and there's this new Beseech the Mirror, which is a fun card that I wanna see what I can do with that one. Um, but yeah, Legacy, I could see playing anything. If it was tomorrow, I'd probably play Grixis Delver, but plenty of time to try to brew something up or find a new deck that I like.
And you're headed to correct me if I'm wrong. You're headed to Vegas in a bit too, so you'll be playing at a pretty high level there as well. Worlds, I think, right?
Yeah, that's right. The end of September is the World Championships. That's standard and booster draft.
So as we get into talking about potential Legacy decks, and Grixis Delver is one of the top decks in the format. It just adopted one of the best cards to come out in a long time for black as a fair color in Orcish Bowmasters. That card is like, I don't know if you've seen recent metagame data, but it is like in half of decks. Like you can expect to run into it literally as a 4 of in half of the decks that you run into in a field. And one of the decks, we want to talk about Jund. I know people watching obviously want to hear you talk about Jund. You're the Jund guy. You are the man when it comes to that archetype. And we've seen you recently piloted on 90s MTG to a winning record in playing some number of Orcish Bowmasters. Is Jund at all something that you would consider for a high-level Legacy event, or is that something that you keep to the locals?
Good question. It's somewhere in between those two. Like I think I would need to do some work and sort of like well, as we talked about earlier, I feel like the non-brainstorm decks have the burden of proof. Like you got to be pretty sure that this is a competitive strategy before you bring it to a big tournament. And so I would have to prove it with Jund that this is a good deck. I do think it has some good things going for it. I've been winning more than I've been losing with it recently. Like that's actually one of the I'll go back and tell the story of like how I ended up playing Jund more recently. Is I usually take like informal notes when I play like on Magic Online. I it's not anything too in depth, but I'll just go like, oh, I won 2-0 against Death and Taxes, or I lost 1-2 against Reanimator, whatever. And so at a certain point, I was like, hey, let me actually do something with these notes. Like, let me compile them and see if I can learn anything. And I added up like, all my results from a couple of different top archetypes that I had been playing with. And surprisingly, like Jund was one of my highest win rate decks. So I was like, I wonder if there's something there. Let me pursue it a little bit. And yeah, Jund just kind of surprises you. Like it never looks that great on paper, but it's got all these great weapons and sideboard options, and so a few good matchups out there. And then Orcish Bowmasters got printed. So I'm like, well, this is one of the best new cards in the format. Jund is a great home for it. And it's not particularly good against Jund. So you're getting like the best of both worlds in that sense. So that's why I decided to, play a bit more with it after the release of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I think we watched you recently like steamroll an 8 cast deck on 90s MTG. Just like it was a masterclass in like what a Jund deck can do against one of the more powerful decks in the format.
Yeah, for sure, and that's what I mean by getting the great sideboard options. Like, hey, if I show up to a tournament and I really want to beat 8 cast, it's like you've got Pernicious Deed, you've got Ancient Grudge, you've got Force of Vigor, you got Collector Oof and ways to search for it. Like the weapons are there. It's just a matter of if you can nail it for the matchups that are really most important that weekend.
Yeah, that it's a color combination that currently in Legacy is actually like really well suited to deal with how diverse the card pool is at the top tables. We recently had Strifle on, who like originated Strifle Pile, and he's just on four. He's on 4 Assassin's Trophy, and like the more and Zach talked about it off camera, the more we were like, man, that card is extremely well positioned right now, given that like the 4 color decks don't play that many basics, if they play any at all. Same thing with the Delver decks that now are in a 3rd color, so it's like maybe they don't play the basic anymore. So the Assassin's Trophy is typically free, or rather, there's no downside to being able to hit your opposing Caracas or an opposing Planeswalker or whatnot. It seems like it's just like one of the more underused tools in the new format, given that like fair decks can get into black more easily now because Bowmasters is so good. Is Assassin's Trophy like similar on your radar as like something that you'd play in high numbers in your current versions of Jund, or do you have enough tools that you like sort of don't need this catch-all?
I love it, and that's the right word
Yeah.
for it, is catch-all. I really like to play the efficient cards, Lightning Bolt, as my a premier one mana removal spell, but you need to diversify. You need to have a way to kill Murktide Region and Planeswalkers, and I can't count the number of times Boseiju or Assassin's Trophy and Boseiju have gotten me out of like sticky situations against Dark Depths, which would otherwise be a horrible matchup. So it just really does a lot, and you add all those corner cases together, and it just comes out to be a really desirable card.
You have a lot of one of the most for a lot of Legacy players, one of the best GPs to watch coverage for at all is the one where you were doing both commentary and playing simultaneously. It is colloquially known as GP Reid, and you like played really really well, really deep, while also doing double duty on commentary. You literally were in a win and you were like this close to top 8, and you played Grixis Control in that metagame. And this is like a long time ago, back when like Baleful Strix and Hymn to Torok were really good against Sensei's divining top type strategies. Is Grixis, which is colloquially known in Legacy as Blue Jund, is that something that you would explore in this kind of format where Orcish Bowmasters and Baleful Strix and things like that would still be available to you?
I would, yeah. The same thing goes for both color combinations. You just have access to all these really, really awesome cards, and it's about finding the configuration that works for you and can fight the important matchups. Now, one thing that I can say about both decks is a lot of the cards you're excited about cost 2 mana, and that's a dangerous spot in Legacy because, especially in 2023 Legacy, like a lot of times the game is pretty much decided by the time you're untapping for your second turn. So if you get too much into the deck building of like, oh yeah, I love Hymn to Torok, I love Baleful Strix, I love Assassin's Trophy, I love Orcish Bowmasters, then like this is a real problem that you're going to have to address is how do you take enough impactful actions that you're not falling behind, especially when you're on the draw before your second turn. So Grixis has the advantage that you can get Force of Will and Force of Negation, but this is a big problem that I've been running into with Jund also, and not to discourage people, of course, from trying out these decks, but just be aware that this is a big thing that you have to have on your radar, is like what plays am I making to impact the game for 1 mana and 0 mana. Brainstorm and Ponder don't count. Those cards are great, but that's not a turn one play that's going to help you keep pace against a really, really fast Legacy deck these days.
Yeah, you're because you had mentioned that you're a contrarian and that you like proving the naysayers wrong, and there's a bunch of new cards out of Wilds of Eldraine that seem really, really good in Jund. And we're going to talk about Questing Druid and Mosswood Dread Knight. Those obviously seem like 3-for-1, never-ending recursive threat, like seem premier for a Jund archetype. But one thing that we didn't mention that you just made me think of. Up the Beanstalk has been seeing a lot of action in like 4-color and 5-color like Uro value piles. And right before we came on, I was like, what cards do I remember Reid playing that were like sort of off the beaten path? And I remember there was one deck list, I don't remember where, but I remember you were playing Murderous Cut. And I was like, he's got Murderous Cut, and now we got Up the Beanstalk, and Fury is busted. And now I'm like thinking of all these 5-drops outside of blue. And I'm like, is Up the Beanstalk actually just the nut in non-blue decks? Is this something that you've thought about at all beyond like me just having the epiphany moments before we hopped on this call?
Yeah, Up the Beanstalk is just a broken card. So every format has its own set of like ways that you can kind of take advantage of this card. But yeah, for sure, like combining it with free spells or discounted spells in any format is very exciting. And yeah, I think Legacy is no exception.
So you heard it here first. Get your Up the Beanstalks.
Yeah. To just jump back real fast to what you were talking about with the 2-drop slot, because there's so much pressure on that slot, do you think that maybe it's time for Spell Snare to come back into play? It's been out of vogue for so long.
Yeah, it depends, exactly how the metagame shakes out. But Spell Snare, I do think, is a card that like fair blue decks could consider. Yeah, I mean, Orcish Bowmasters right off the bat, it's kind of like your closest approximation to Orcish Bowmasters Elemental Blast, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of the great things about having a purely black threat is you dodge all the elemental blasts. But Spell Snare is probably one of the cleanest answers out there for that.
Have you considered any of those new cards from Wilds of Eldraine into the Legacy decks that you've played recently? Is there anything that's exciting you from that new set?
Yeah, I like the cards. I like Up the Beanstalk, though my first instinct would be to pair that with Force of Will. I like Questing Druid, though you have to be careful because 1 toughness can get you into trouble in Legacy. But yeah, for sure, there's a lot of really cool stuff. The Sleep Cursed Fairy, I think, is a great card as well. But yeah.
Where have you been thinking of that card?
Just anywhere that you want 1 mana blue threats. I'm not like ready to say it's better than Delver or anything, but if you want more, or if you felt like you wanted to avoid having those 1 toughness cards, Ward 2 is really nice on a 1 mana play too.
Yeah. The problem I have with Sleep Cursed Fairy is top decking it. Like, it's amazing to get it on turn 1, drop it on turn 1, and then a couple turns it'll untap, and it's basically doing a really good impression of Nimble Mongoose, right? But drawing it like in the middle of the game just seems like the absolute worst.
Yeah, that's a good point for sure.
Zach, if you draw it in the middle of the game, you've obviously never missed a land drop, and you're the Ancient Tomb guy. You have all this extra mana. You just pay the mana and get the stun counters off it, my dude.
Just untap it.
It's crazy. It's crazy. Reid, I don't know what he's talking about. Zach, come on, man. You have all the mana. I want to talk about one card that's been on my radar, and I want to see if Reid, if we're on the same wavelength. Bro, is Reap the nut? Is Reap just the card we've been wanting this whole time in the Bowmaster metagame?
Yeah.
For those who don't know, Reap is a one in a green for an instant that says you can regrow cards out of your graveyard equal to the number of black permanents your opponents have, and all of our opponents have black permanents on the board thanks to Orcish Bowmasters.
Let me start by saying, like, this is what I love about Legacy. The idea that you could bust out a card like this, out of the probably not even the trade binder, out of the old white box that's been in your closet for 20 years, and
The
you
bulk
play it
box,
against
yeah.
somebody in there, and they're like, "Oh man, I never thought of somebody using this card." So this is the beauty, and yeah, I mean, Reap would be a really fun card to play in Jund or whatever it might be. It's just like it's just what I said earlier, or what we said earlier about choosing your matchups. And I wish sometimes that you could get 20, 25 sideboard cards and find room for all this stuff. But yeah, I mean, you just choose, like, do you want it to be a meltdown against 8 cast? Do you want it to be a choke or a carpet of flowers against the blue decks? Do you want it to be reap against the black decks? All these cards are just so awesome and can hit so well in the right circumstances. And it's on you to make make those circumstances happen.
Reap came out before they just decided that, like, if you're going to regrow something, you have to exile it. So I'm pretty sure, like, you want 2 Reaps if you're going to be playing 1 Reap, right?
Oh yeah, most definitely.
We are trying to go infinite. That is what we're
Yeah.
trying to do. Yeah, we just let our opponent have all of the Bowmasters so we can just keep regrowing stuff.
Hmm.
Reed, when you're ever so like when you're thinking of new decks or taking the contrarian brew and wanting to prove people wrong, where do you when you're brewing a deck, where does your process start? Do you go from, for example, a particular card and you're like, I think this is underexplored and I want to maximize it? Or do you think of a certain archetype and go, I want to explore and improve upon this archetype in ways that I think the community isn't really recognizing certain avenues to go down? Where do you start in your process to brew something that you think is going to be effective for a tournament?
It really could be any of the above. You never know where inspiration is going to come from, but it can be a card that you really like. It can be an archetype. It can be sort of a dynamic in the metagame that you want to exploit. So, like we were talking about up the beanstalk a moment ago. So when I see a card like that, first thing pops in my mind is like, how do I punish people for doing that? Like, how do I get my Narsets and Hole Breachers in the mix so that people regret playing that card against me. So anything like that can be a spark of inspiration.
Is when you are do you find that you gravitate more towards looking at the metagame and how to attack it as opposed to starting from a ground zero sort of powerful point of view? Because when you were like, oh yeah, if I look at Beanstalk and I want to punish them, it also reminds me back in the Treasure Cruise days when you were the only player playing a plateau and what was the deal 3 gain 3 spell?
Lightning Helix.
Lightning Helix, yes.
Hmm.
There was a point during the Delve era of Treasure Cruise where you had a Lightning Helix in your deck because Blue Red Treasure Cruise was obviously the best thing, and you're like, you and I were playing the same deck except you had Lightning Helix in your deck, and I was like, there's no way Reed's wrong. So what didn't I see? You know what I mean? I was like, what didn't I see that he got to Lightning Helix? And that's where I'm thinking, like, is that, do you go like the weakness that these decks have, I want to attack those, versus do you find yourself doing that more often in a metagame when you're playing the style of decks that you like to play, as opposed to something like, oh, Beseech is this new busted card that can do a bunch of busted things. What's the most broken thing I can do? And brew from there. That sort of lanes.
So the Lightning Helix, I'm guessing what happened there was I had just played enough against, probably the important matchup was Delver, and I identified this pattern where like the games would go really long and I would stabilize at a low life total, but then I'd have to sweat them killing me with treasure cruising into their remaining 3 lightning bolts, that kind of thing. Once I had locked up the game with my removal spells.
Oh yeah, 100%. I can tell you that, like, when I saw you do that, the Lightning Helix tech, that same event, I was knocked out of the event because I played against Burn, which was still of a fairly popular deck, and at the time, Miracles didn't really have any reasonable life gain to play in the 75. This was back when like Philip Schoenegger was advocating for Miracles players to like go down to like 19 lands, all non-basics and things like that. And the second that I established a counterbalance and I had everything locked up, and then my opponent cast a Rift Bolt to kill me and Burn and knock me out of the tournament, I was like, should have played the Lightning Helix.
Yeah, and then with all the card selection and like Snapcaster Mage, the singleton weird cards like that pull extra weight. But yeah, that's when I was playing a lot, and when you could
Mhm.
get 100 reps in a given matchup and like identify those patterns, then I would look for those creative ways to solve the problems that I was identifying. These days, much more to answer your question, I would just focus on something that I believe is powerful in its own
Mhm.
right, and this is for a few reasons. Like number one, it's just easier. You don't have to be a master of every little detail in order to execute well on that. And then also like legacy is just really, really diverse. So even if you
Mhm.
can identify a trend in the metagame, oh, up the beanstalk is the hot new thing. Like a lot of great players are playing with it. I want to be prepared and one up the beanstalk people. And then it's like you do that and you just get paired against reanimator, storm, death, and taxes, and you're like, oh, well, that was counterproductive, you know.
Yeah.
So
You've already nailed the metagame.
yeah, you there's just so much that you have to deal with in legacy that I actually think it's often a mistake to like hyper focus on one element.
It is one of the things I like about Legacy is that unlike like standard or modern, people can't pivot as quickly. So you don't end up being like a week late to the like hot new tech when you're like, all right, I'm gonna do this, and then everyone's like, yeah, well, I'm already on this to beat the other thing, and now that you've sideboarded all your red blasts against all these non-red decks, that kind of thing. Like,
Yeah, totally.
people pivot a lot slower in this format, so it's one of the nice things about it.
Reed, could you? I just a question that this is making me think of. I'm just curious if there was ever a time where you recognized a very particular sort of like level up moment throughout your career where you were like, "Oh, I now that I understand this, the way that I view how to attack a metagame or how to approach a tournament or anything like that." Has there ever been like those kinds of watershed moments for you that you like remember distinctly?
Yeah, good question. There is one memory that I can share and get. I'm going to get like a tiny bit into the weeds here, but for the sake of the story, it was this was a standard pro tour, and a couple teammates and I were going to play Jund, in the era of like Thragtusk and Farseek and stuff like that. But we had this problem against the red aggro decks where um, they would kind of go wide with a lot of like smaller creatures, and just having to point removal spells at everything they played was sometimes ineffective. So we're like, man, this should be a good matchup. You have Thragtusk, you have cheap removal. Like, what's going wrong here? How do we solve this problem? And my teammate Ben Sek, who he's like super super old school player, been around forever. Like he's seen everything and solved every problem that there is to solve. He's like, this. Here's what I do in this situation, and he walked me over to his computer, pulled up Gatherer, and we literally searched every single legal card in our colors through the lens of like, how do we solve this problem against this very specific problem against the very specific matchup. What we came up with was Strangleroot Geist, 2 mana, 2/1 Undying, and we're like, most people consider this like some kind of green beatdown card, but we're just going to put it in our deck to block.
It's a
Just
speed
turn
bump,
two
yeah.
Strangleroot Geist, go. Good luck attacking me with all your tutus. And that was like how we came up with this very unintuitive solution to a problem. And so I've tried to carry that like strategy with me ever since, where it's, let's play the matchup with an eye for what's actually going on in the games, identify the problems, and then sometimes it's appropriate to think outside the box in terms of ways to level your opponents or to solve those problems.
Yeah, that's really enticing. There's um, a new deck that with from Beseech. It's the new Mono Black Helm. I mean, Mono Black Helm deck has been around for a little bit,
Sure.
but it's gotten a huge upgrade from Beseech. And the when I saw that deck won the ELM, the big legacy event over in Europe, and it was playing a Beseech, and it was getting to tutor for things like Karn, which you expect, Helm of Obedience, obviously, but then it had the one of ill-gotten gains that it could
Wow.
beseech for, because with Leyline of the Void or Dothi Voidwalker, it would just effectively be a mind twist. And against certain opponents where you wouldn't, you needed some to be able to just like play a Leyline and then just Dark Ritual for beseech and have a way to kill the opponent before they could kill you on the backswing, because Helm is obviously pretty mana intensive, and Karn can't necessarily get a win condition or a way to stop within the same turn cycle. And so they just found this like super fast way to like be faster than matchups that they were too slow for. And that made me think like, how would you get to ill-gotten gains if you didn't look at it through the lens of a Stranglerootgeist?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like,
it's a super valuable exercise to do with tutors. It reminds me of the people who go really deep on the doomsday piles too, where it's
mhm.
like, all right, well, like what pile do I get against this hate piece, and what pile do I get against this hate piece, and what cards do I have to put in my deck to set myself up to beat everything. So there's a lot of really cool stuff for the folks who are really into it.
Yeah, there's a value there also into like looking to see what the rest of the people who are building that same kind of deck are doing as well, and just be like, okay, what's different about that? That's how I ended up on like Berserk in a Death Shadow deck, just being like, how do I solve? I'm constantly running into people just blocking me with their their Elvish Visionary and then bouncing it with Wirewood Symbiote, and I'm just sitting here like behind a 12/12 wondering what to do, and it's like, oh yeah, well this guy's playing Berserk, and that seems like it works fine.
Yeah,
And,
plus you
and
get to play with Berserk, and that's just
yeah,
so sweet.
Berserk is the best. Yeah.
Yeah. When Zach and I would actually get together in person and playtest, he would always be like, "I'm going to kill you with the Berserk with the good art, not the Berserk with the bad art."
Now there's
Very
three
good.
arcs.
Yeah. Now there's 3 arts. Yeah. Now we appreciate it. Reed, when you think of like moments in Legacy that you really enjoy, is there a type of deck that you enjoy watching people play that you may not play yourself? I'm thinking of an example because we were talking about that idea of like ways to approach a matchup. I'm thinking like I always appreciate watching a good Storm pilot who's like really proficient, even though I know that I like am not nearly well suited to play that kind of deck. And I appreciate like the ways that they think through how to navigate turn cycles the way that I don't. Similar, like when you were playing, like when you play Jund, and I would watch those games back. I'm thinking I know how to play like a sort of mid-rangey interactive strategy, but like the timing of things, the way that like I watch you would play versus decisions that I'm making, it's just like it's different, and there's a lot to learn there. Is there like a type of archetype or a player in particular that you feel you learn a lot from when you watch?
I like to watch the decks, say like Wasteland, Richmond Port decks, where the really skilled pilots are kind of taking every step to like slowly tighten the noose on the
Mm,
opponent and putting every hate piece exactly into place, and knowing how and when to attack the mana and stuff like that. I think there's a lot of subtlety there, which I really appreciate about Legacy in a world where really flashy plays and Grizzlebrand draw 7 cards and all this stuff is possible. Like really focusing on the very small matchups between cards and like preventing people from making those really cool plays. That's one of the aspects of the format that I enjoy, and I like to watch a really really good Death and Taxes or Lands player navigate
mm.
those games.
Is there in your recollection of playing Legacy? Is there a match in particular that like the moment of you playing Legacy where you're like, this is the best play I've ever made in this format?
um, I had one game where it was a Magic Online tournament, say 18 months ago, something like that.
Mm,
Um, and I was playing elves, and I played a game. I think I won on like turn 3 or turn 4 through like several really potent hate pieces, and I completed the game, and I was like, "Wow!" Like I think that was the best game of Magic I ever played, which was like kind of like a tongue in cheek thing because it was a very short game, and there was like just a couple of like very meaningful decisions. But it was one of those games where I was like, "Yeah, I had to put like every piece exactly in place to avoid disaster and like have the result be me winning, because my opponent had a plague engineer, and it's like if I navigated incorrectly against the plague engineer, that was going to wipe my whole board. And so all these different things. And that's one of the cool things about Legacy is sometimes the games are very long, but sometimes the games are very short, and in both cases like you better play tight to avoid disaster and make sure the close calls are going in your favor.
Zach, before I don't know if there's any last questions that you have before we you know tighten things up here, but I wanted to ask Reid. I know that like I only know you so much through Magic. I know that you live now in New York, where I get to see you at the locals every once in a while. And you know, it's always fun to talk Magic. But I'm just curious, man. Like, what is it that you like to do outside of Magic? Is there like a hobby that you find time for that you enjoy besides slinging some spells?
Good question. Yeah, well, so here's the thing: is when you ask that question to like any normal person, a lot of people will have one thing, one hobby that they're like super into. But for me, like my hobby and my work and everything is like all rolled into this crazy passion and time sink of Magic. So a lot of like the rest of my life is the goal is like to find a little balance, right? Like I
Mm,
purposely don't get myself like really, really, really into something else because that would crowd out all the normal like healthy experiences that a human being can have.
yeah.
So I try to spend my time in a balanced way and like get some physical activity, get some nature, get some social life, all these like little bits of things. But yeah, I mean, I love gaming. I got a membership to the rock climbing gym down the street, so I find some fun things to do. But yeah, I would say mostly outside of Magic, it's like let me try to have a balanced life.
Is this the Cliffs?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah, dude, the Cliffs are great. That place is so awesome. Uh, Anybody who hasn't been rock climbing before, go to a rock wall and like have somebody walk you through how to actually do it. It is an absolute thrill, especially
Yeah,
if they have
really good fun.
the rotating wheel, where like the wheel just keeps rotating. You just keep climbing until you fall off. Have you gotten a chance to do that yet?
I haven't done it myself, but I've seen this. That's pretty
Oh,
crazy.
it,
This
it
sounds
is
like
it
a
is
night terror to me.
no, dude.
It's like
Let me tell you.
Sisyphean nightmare.
If there's anything we learned about like wanting to grind until the very end, reap for your reap, the physical manifestation of that is trying to last on the rolling rock wall for as long as you can.
Hmm.
Yeah, most of my physical activity is based on biking. I'm just like I'll bike there. It's Philly's a nice small town too. So much smaller than New York. When I lived in New York, I didn't realize how large it was until I moved to Philly and was like, oh, I can like traverse the entire town in like 40 minutes.
Oh,
Get
that's
to one
interesting.
side. Yeah, get to one side for the other in 40 minutes, like on a bike. One of the things I wanted to plug real fast is that we wanted to get for the deck list from '90s MTG that you played against that 8 cast match, and talk about it. But we're gonna have that on our Moxfield site. So a quick shout out to Moxfield. Eternal Dirtles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is the best Magic the Gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks from Commander to Legacy and even fan-supported formats like Pre-Modern and Old School. You can see all of our decks on our Moxfield. Follow the links below to stay tuned. And then Reid, I also wanted to extend to you. We're gonna get you a T-shirt. We've got a few different T-shirts, so we'll have you pick one out. We've got the Eternal Dirtles Classic T-shirt, the What It Do T-shirt. Phil asking you what your deck does, and then we have the Dirtle Mania T-shirt as well. So we'll get you one of those T-shirts for being on with us. We really appreciate you coming on and hanging out with us for a while.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll cherish it.
Reid, where can people find you, my dude? Where should people go? Where should people catch all your stuff?
So all of my strategy content, my videos, my written stuff goes up on channelfireball.com. That's number one place to find my work. Also, you can sometimes catch me streaming. I'm twitch.tv/readerrabbit.
We'll have that link down below. And before any final send-offs, I want to plug one of my favorite quotes of all time. Is actually a Reid Duke quote. Reid was playing Miracles. Who would have thought? He was playing Miracles in a video for Channel Fireball, and he played through a league. And at the end of it, he said, well, there you go. That's pretty much the Miracles experience. We worked extremely, extremely hard, and we won half of our matches.
Yep, that's it.
That's it.
That's great. Yeah, I think with that, we could probably sign off from there. Thanks everybody for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. And we'll catch you next time. Reid, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Bye, everyone.
Hey, if you like this video, why don't you check out this one with Bosch and Roll. We interviewed him right after he won the SCG Con Open for Baltimore. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a good one.